Scott Morrison told the Coalition Party Room this morning that there were people who were trying to put blame for the situation in Victoria on the federal government, but the public were not buying it. Morrison, according to MPs, said that people could see the difference in approaches between New South Wales and Victoria when it came to the virus, and people could see through the argument the Commonwealth was to blame for outbreaks, and people can see it's not true, he said. The opposition has obviously made that claim in regard to quarantine and vaccination. The PM said Queensland have not had the success of other states like New South Wales and South Australia when it comes to numbers of vaccinations, and this was because they did not have the same hubs to visit that have been set up in those states. Health Minister Greg Hunt told the room in response to MPs' questions that although some GPs may be complaining that they were only getting 50 doses at a time, this was not true. They were getting between 150 and 400 at a time. He heard from MPs that some GPs are advising people to wait for the Pfizer shot rather than take the AstraZeneca, and the Health Minister said this should not be happening. After a couple of cases in aged care in Victoria, the government continues to cop flak on the aged care issue. You saw it again there in question time, and whether they have done enough on vaccination in aged care homes. Across Victoria, I'm told, 15% of families are not consenting for their relatives, the aged care residents, to get the jab, so more consent would be handy. One of the other issues around people in aged care homes being administered AstraZeneca is clearly the time lag between the AstraZeneca first shot and second shot. It is 12 weeks. Pfizer, you get the second dose within 3 weeks. The PM also again told his MPs that the election will be next year. He keeps reaffirming that at every turn, not this year, next year. And he was asked about these comments that he's made several times, that the vaccine rollout is not a race. We saw Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack say that to KIERAN on Sunday Agenda on the weekend, him repeating that. The Prime Minister appearing to almost blame the phrase here on the Health Department Secretary, Brendan Murphy, or at least say he was inspired by his pronouncement to make the same pronouncement.
Does the Prime Minister still say that vaccinating all Australians, including aged care residents and workers, is, to quote him, not a race?
The reference to not a race, Mr Speaker, was first said by the Secretary of the Department of Health, Mr Speaker. Professor Brendan Murphy, on my left. Secretary of the Department of Health and the Chair of the Scientific and Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation, Mr Speaker, and I affirmed his remarks, Mr Speaker.
A little puzzled by that response. As Prime Minister, you're responsible for your own statements. Jim Chalmers, the Shadow Treasurer, well, he tried to rile up Josh Frydenberg on Victoria and not supplying JobKeeper for this one-week lockdown, which looks like it could be a 2-week lockdown, and Josh Frydenberg didn't take the bait.
Victorians wouldn't be locked down today if it wasn't for the Morrison government's failures on vaccines and quarantine. Why has this Treasurer refused to provide any additional support to small businesses and workers hardest hit by these failures? What kind of Victorian abandons Victorians in their hour of need?
Members on my left, the Treasurer has the call.
This Treasurer, this Prime Minister, this government has provided more support to Victoria than any previous government, Mr Speaker. More support than any previous government.
That's as fired up as he got. He didn't take the bait otherwise. Now, Mark Butler, the opposition health spokesman, he was asking Scott Morrison about aged care, particularly comments in estimates from Richard Colbeck, which indicated the government wasn't responsible for the vaccine rollout in aged care. Scott Morrison this time very much accepting responsibility over this area.
This morning, the Aged Care Minister was asked if the government was responsible for the vaccine rollout in aged care, yes or no. The Minister replied, well, it's not a yes or no answer. So I asked the Prime Minister, is the government responsible for the vaccine rollout in aged care?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. The government is indeed responsible for the national vaccination strategy, Mr Speaker, right across the country. And we're doing that in partnership with states and territories. Of course we are, Mr Speaker, general practitioners and a whole range of others who are supporting these efforts.